This tutorial goes over how to build a button in this style using your selection tools. So let's create a new file. Now this would be for web navigation, so we want to change the color mode to RGB, the resolution to 72 dpi, and then I'm going to change mine to pixels and just put in 3 by 1, because we can always change the size of that smaller a little later if we have to. And then click OK. I'm going to fill my screen a little better by hitting Command plus to zoom in. And then usually when I start projects like this, I begin on its own layer, so the background typically doesn't have anything on it. First thing we need to do is create the shape of our button. So grab your rectangular marquee tool and make sure the feather is set to 0, and then click and drag out in your canvas area to create the main shape of your button. Once you have that made, we need to add the circular end, so change to the elliptical marquee tool. We're going to add, so hold down Shift, or if you want to push this button up here, you can do that. I'm going to line this right up with the top of that marching ants and start dragging. But you'll notice how it's that oval-y appearance again. You can just eyeball it, but if you want it to be perfectly circle, don't let go of your mouse, just hit Shift again, and then you can drag down. Remember, if you need to relocate it at all, you can hold space bar down as well and move it around. And when you let go, you've added to your selection. Now it didn't leave me much room over here to work, so I can actually move my selection by having one of my selection tools and just hovering over it so that my cursor looks like this, and then clicking and dragging. I'm going to do this side, so hold down Shift to add, click Start Dragging, hit Shift again to keep it circular, and that almost lines up, but I'm going to hold spacebar and line it up a little better. And there we have it. That's our shape. You can use any number of ways to get that shape, but this is the most easiest for me with these tools. Because this is a internet graphic, I can use much brighter colors than I would if it were printing out. So go ahead and hit OK, and then Option Delete to fill. So I've made this a base layer, and I'm actually going to name this base to keep us organized. Now we need to do that reflection that's on top of this that gives this kind of its glassy look. So create a new layer and name it Reflection. Now you'll notice I still have my marching ants there. My selection is still there. If you don't, hold down Command and click on the base layer thumbnail to get that back. Make sure you're on your reflection layer, because what we're going to do now is transform that selection in so that it'll fill an area like this on our example. Go to the Select menu and choose Transform Selection. And then just move the edges in and the bottom one up a little bit and the top one down just a little bit, and then hit Enter to finalize. Once we have that done, let's grab white as our color. So white right now is my background. I'm going to just hit the little switch thing to get white in front and fill by hitting Option Delete. This time I'm going to deselect, Command D. Now obviously this isn't what my example looks like. We need to make the edges of this reflection softer. So I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool and set my feather to about 8 pixels in this example. Remember, depending on the resolution of the file you're working with, that may be a bigger or smaller number. And then I'm going to just click and drag to choose this area down here and hit Delete to clear it. Now you'll notice that it didn't delete all the way down there, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hit Command D to deselect and grab my eraser tool by hitting E, since I can't find it over here. There we go. Eraser tool. And then right click, you can change the size and the hardness. So we want a soft edge. We should probably take the softness or the hardness down quite a bit. Now I can erase. So to erase in a straight line, if you click and hold down Shift, when you start moving it will. Now see, that took away a little too much. So I'm going to hold down Option Control and drag my cursor up to get an even softer edge, and try this again. And then a smaller one to do the same on the top. Getting pretty close. Now we need to reduce the transparency of this layer. So the opacity or transparency can be affected over here in the layers panel. If you click on opacity and grab that slider and move it down till it looks about right. So I've got mine about at 65. That looks pretty good. Alright, let's make a highlight, because one of the things that sells the idea that this is a glossy item is a highlight like this. The more shiny an object is, the harder that highlight will be. So let's create a new layer and call it highlight. And this time I'm going to grab my elliptical marquee tool and again set the feather maybe to about 4 or 5 and create kind of a small skinny selection. And remember, because I had my feather on, when I let go it might almost get rid of the marching ants that you can see. But if I hit grab white as my main color and then fill it by hitting Option Delete, you'll notice that it did still fill in outside of where I can see those marching ants, but not quite enough. So I'm going to hit Option Delete to do that again, and then Command D to deselect. Now yours might be perfect, but mine ended up a little bit big, so I've grabbed my Move tool. I'm going to inch this down just a tiny bit and then transform by hitting Command T, because I want mine just a little bit skinnier than that. And enter to finalize. Okay. On the examples I was looking at, most of these buttons actually have a gradient on their base layer that goes from the bright pure tone down to a darker one. So let's do that one now. Click on your base layer and then hold Command and then click on the thumbnail to select just that area so that our gradient doesn't go outside that area. Now I'm going to click on my color picker and choose the blue, and then move the selection of blue way down into some of the darker tones. Now I don't move it down into black, because black in the color world is kind of a dead color. Even if it's just got a little bit of blue in it, it'll keep more life in this. Then click OK. Alrighty, so grab your gradient tool. You want to set it up here so that it is the foreground to background, and also the linear option right there. And I'm not actually sure if this is going to put dark at the top or bottom, so I'm just going to click and drag down to find out, and I can hold Shift to make it a perfectly straight one. Okay, that put the dark at the top, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo, and then this time I'm going to start at the bottom and move up. And if that was a little too much blue for you, like I think mine's a little too much blue, I'm going to do the same, but not drag up so far. You'll see that you've got a little bit of control of exactly how much blue is there, especially if your opacity for that tool is set at 100%. So that's looking pretty good. I think I'm done with that part. Our example over here has a bit of an outline around it. So to make a perfect outline of the image that we've got, there are some effects that we could do, but since this is selections, we'll do it this way. By selecting the base area, which you should still have selected. If not, hold down Command and click on the thumbnail. And then go up to the Select menu, choose Modify, and Expand. And because this is a button and we're working in low resolution, the 72 dpi, we don't need to enter more than 2 or 3. So I'm going to put in 3 and see how that looks. That looks a little big. Command Z to undo, select, modify, expand. This time I'm going to do 2, and that looks pretty good right there. So I need to create a new layer for this, because if I fill in, it's going to cover all of my blue that I just did. Alrighty, I believe in the example it's actually a gradient filling that goes from kind of a medium gray to a darker gray that's not quite black. And I use the gradient tool to do the same thing, except this time we do want the darker on the top. And then click that layer and move it down below the base and see what it looks like. You can even deselect if you want. If you'd like to move that so the darker is on the bottom once it's deselected, I think if you just hit Command T and flip vertically it should work out. So, or you could just redo your gradient either way. Alright, we're getting almost done. Now that I'm looking at this, I think my reflection is still maybe a little too strong. So I'm going to lower that and even move it up just a tiny bit. So I grab my move tool. Or, once you have your move tool, if you hold down Command and use the direction arrow keys, you can nudge it up. Do the same to the highlight. Okay, let's take a look at our other example. Now, anything that is glossy like this and has light supposedly reflecting through it, what happens, and you see this on people's eyes as well, is the light will enter in from one side and create a highlight there, and then on the opposite side of that glowy object is a more subdued highlight. See this down here? That's part of what makes this look real, is adding that little extra bit of light at the bottom. So let's create that over here. We already have a shape that's almost exactly what we need, so let's just make a copy of the highlight layer by clicking it and dragging it down to the new layer icon and letting go. And then on your image, click and drag it down so it's on the bottom. Now you could come in and reduce the opacity, but I'm actually going to show you a cool trick. We'll be getting more into blend modes later, but if you click on this drop down that says Normal in your Layers panel and choose Overlay, that white will become a slightly more brilliant version of whatever your background color is. We are really close to done now. Let's add a drop shadow to layer 1. And again, you could use an effect for this, but it's a selections assignment, so I'm going to hold Command and click on this most bottommost layer to get that shape selected. Then for shadow, it should have slightly fuzzy edges, so I'm going to go to my Select menu, Modify, and Feather. And again, I'm just going to try maybe 3 and see how that looks. But I won't know until I make a layer and fill it in. So make a new layer, name it Shadow, and move it down so it's just above your background. Grab black as your main color and fill it in. Option, Delete, and then you can deselect. This is a shadow layer that you can actually just nudge around using your arrow keys. If the light is coming from directly above, it would be casting a shadow on the opposite side. And if that's a little too dark, you can always reduce the opacity. In my example, I've also taken a text layer and created type on it. And again, this looks a little pixely because we're actually looking at this button way bigger than it normally would. Let me show you the trick for doing a effects drop shadow. I've got some type made. On any of these layers, if you double click out here in the empty area, you get the effects layer style menu. And we want to do a drop shadow, so you can check the drop shadow box, but if you just check the box, you don't get the editing options for that. You have to actually click on the word to highlight it in blue to get the editing options. And then you have things like distance and some other settings that you can play with and see what you think. Alrighty, there is a button and it is almost ready to go. To make it ready for internet, you would want to at least hide the background so that it's transparent around it, and then trim away all of the empty pixels by going to Edit and choosing, oh nope, it's Image. Go to Image and choose Trim and set it to Transparent Pixels and click OK. So did you see how that moved in a little bit? It didn't move in down here because there's actually some of that drop shadow filling in a little area. For a file like this, I would say first save it as a Photoshop working file. So File, Save, and it should be set to Format Photoshop with Layers. Save. And then the file I'll actually upload to the internet needs to be a PNG. And the reason for that is PNGs or PNGs preserve the transparency, unlike JPEG. So I'm going to go to File and do a Save As and change the format down here to PNG. If by any chance your image mode or color mode is CMYK, that won't be an option. So if PNG is not an option. You might have to go back and change your document to RGB. Now we can say save. You'll probably get this options. I usually just ignore this and click OK. There's really technical stuff that goes on into that, but for us I don't think we need to worry. Let's take a look and see what this looks like at actual size. So grab your zoom tool and then right click out here and choose 100%. And there you go. You have successfully made a button with selections and plenty of fun layers.